coming back next to help us refocus our energy, we've got Karin Giefer, the Executive Creative Director of Applied Data at Frog. Technology-fueled change is helping reshape our societies and economies. Data science, machine learning, and AI are bridging the chasm between human intellect and scalability. This new world promises radical opportunities for businesses and new experiences for customers. So how can marketers and advertisers prepare for and thrive in this new market? Karin's going to outline the opportunities that brands have to develop personalized experiences for consumers. That word I hate. For people, right? Personalized experiences for people, and explore how data, when applied with the designer's lens, has the power to help brands deliver more human experiences. That I like. So let's give a round of applause for Karin.
Is everybody okay if I don't podium? Okay. And as they pull up the thing, it's just like that thing where you're like, oh, wow, your marketing people are so much better at writing than nerdy data people are. It's like, oh, yeah, that sounds awesome. I want to listen to that talk. And I'm like, wait, I'm giving that talk. It's always it's a very popular conversation, and I really am appreciating all of the panels. And I'm not going to lie, I'm having a little bit of like that nerd being invited to the cool kid table, and I'm sort of waiting for like a 1980s teen moment to happen where somebody drives by and I'm in my prom dress and they like throw something at me. But nevertheless, so I'm educated as an architect, and I have a degree in applied mathematics. So of course I'm going to come talk to advertising people, right? So this is sort of the perpetual challenge. And who knew that 20 years ago when I was going to school, and my mother, who is an account person, thought that my choice of job as a creative was cute, and that she was very concerned about my future. And she's still concerned about my future, but for totally different reasons. So title of the talk, Technology-Fueled Change. So when we talk about AI, we're always talking about like conversational AIs and chat-based AIs and whatever else. So anytime you have an AI conversation with a math nerd, there's going to be graphs and there's going to be like history. And I promise we'll take care of those in like 2 slides so everybody's leveled up. And then we'll talk about like my job at Frog, which is actually, let's make this a little bit human. So first thing, we have to say this. So brands, products, and services live deeply in connected and consistently evolving ecosystems, of course, and that's orchestrated by learning systems. So that's where I come in, and that's where we can amplify brands. And I always like to say, well, duh, right? Because everybody understands that. And so really what's happening is that we're witnessing a revolution, and that revolution is an intelligence revolution. And I like to think about this as sort of, I'll give an example of this for my job. So I have a nephew, he's 5, and he's quite the inventor. And he wears glasses, and so he makes X-ray glasses by putting a mirror on his backpack and then like runs a cord from his backpack to his glasses. And he tells me all about how it's going to be an X-ray. So then the sun goes into the thing, and then he says, well, and then this magic happens, and I have X-ray glasses. And what's funny is in my job, very often I hear something similar, which is, so an algorithm's going to solve that. And what people forget is that algorithms are actually designed. Every single algorithm is designed. Yes, it's 1,000-year-old mathematics, but the choice of what data we put on it and what we ask it to do is something that is designed. And now the question is do you want somebody who understands human-centered design, who has a training in empathy, or do you want a math nerd who understands zeros and ones to make these decisions? And that's actually the revolution that we're talking about. So, advertising, so let's talk about white guys. So this isn't actually new, and this is anybody who does machine learning or AI, we should talk about this, which is that this has been coming at us at like a galactic pace since 1956. In fact, in New Hampshire, these guys got together and started talking about artificial intelligence, which we have come to find is neither artificial nor intelligent. And so this is actually what this looks like, right? Just so we're all clear. And so AI is something that I talk about because the marketing team tells me I have to. As as a practitioner, what I really mean is machine learning models or algorithms to solve problems. And so that is just sort of like the big consultancy term. I'll leave this up long enough for everybody to take photos. So this is how this has been going. When we talk about AI, what I'm really trying to figure out is like, what do you actually mean about AI first? Because I'm constantly asked, well, we need an AI. And I'm like, okay. And so it's like, where on the spectrum are we going to talk about that? And so actually, that's what I'm talking about with the spectrum, and I don't mean to be flip about that. Like, when we talk about AI spectrums, we're talking about autonomous AIs, which are like Watson and DeepMind. Like, Frog's never going to design one of those, but we actually need to make the interface better, because did you see how the interface for this thing worked? This is beating the Go champion. Literally, somebody had to like plug some code in it. Like, that's a terrible interface. And so when you have an autonomous AI, this is where human-centered design comes in. Another type of AI is an augmented AI. So this is ways, where a decision has already been made for you, and it just tells you to go right or left. And then there's Ambient AI, and this is like the really creepy stuff of all of the Internet of Things kind of hanging around. But there's a bunch of other things when we talk about AI, right? So there's things like automation, and there's things about awareness, and all of those things. So what we always have to think about from a design standpoint is like, what is in fact that spectrum that we're dealing with, and where do we want to be involved in that? And so more importantly, how does a brand deal with that? So as I said, Frog's never going to design a Watson or a DeepMind. That's just not our space. But please call us. We'll happily help you come up with a better interface for it. Augmented AI is something that we spend a bunch of time doing, which is how can we augment the designs that we're already doing? And then ambient AI becomes this thing that sort of feeds back. And so these become these feedback loops. I'm nearly done with the sort of like primer on AI, and then we'll go into what this means for design. So here is an example of this. So if we're talking about AI, and we have the spectrum from complete autonomous AIs to ambient AIs, basically what that means is that everything on the planet is knowable. And that's a really scary thing, because intent is a problem, right? And so coders are people who are really good with just like, oh, here's the data, I'm going to do something with that. Versus a designer who has some empathy, who can say, you know, that wasn't really how that was intended to be used. We should understand what that means. And here's an analog example of intent of data sets, because frankly, data is the only thing that is the competitive advantage for any brand anymore. I think. Big, bold statement, right? So Agatha Christie, many, many books over a long period of time, right? Awesome nerd who also loved Agatha Christie took all of her books and loaded them into an algorithm, which magically told him this. So a thing that she never announced to the world and was never intended to be a data set that is completely benign data set. You can use very simple linear regressions to figure out that if we look at the number of repeated phrases and the complexity of words that we have, here's a hypothesis. Did Agatha Christie suffer from Alzheimer's? It turns out she did, in fact, die from Alzheimer's, something that was never, ever announced. And nobody got hold of her medical records. It wasn't public. So this is the thing of like, okay, well, if everything is knowable and we have this idea of intent, all we really have then is designers with context, right? And so this is actually, I love this quote because it's true. But sometimes what you're looking for is answers. And so when we talk about creativity, what we're talking about is what do we value, right? So the context of the things that we're putting around what we value. And so it's a big question that we have in our office, which is just because we can doesn't mean we should, and maybe there's a better way to do something, right? And that's, ethics, and I think we were talking about ethics earlier on the panel, and this is if you want your kids to have really excellent jobs, have them go to school to do philosophy or ethics if they're not mathy. So I'm going to talk about basically where we've come from, where we currently are, and where we're going when it comes to design. And this is implicit that design has everything to do with brands, right? So we're talking about more than just television adverts. We're talking about branded everything. And branded everything means branded experiences. And I'll show some examples of that. But this is the way that a design process in a creative firm works. You try and understand the problem, you define the problem, you design around the problem, and then you do it and you repeat, right? And that's literally it. And so this is what this looks like, and it's incredible. It transforms experiences. So this is my one frog plug. Everything else is about framing. So we worked with many other consultants on the Magic Band experience. So if anybody's been to a Disney theme park and had one of these, you're welcome, and also we're sorry. So what this is just identifying every one of the touch points along the way, and how do you make that optimized for a better experience, right? For a human experience. And that is literally everything from the time that you're on the computer thinking about going to Disney World, to the time that you start scheduling your trip, to the time you get the band, to the time that you pre-order your food, and so on and so forth. And then at the very end, after the incredible experience wears off, you get your bill, but we also package it with things like incredible photos of your child being surprised by a princess, right? And so what we're selling there is magic, and that is something you design. So the next step is now once we have a whole bunch of data, this is the world that we're living in now. And this is the world where I'm not sure that we would consider anybody who uses like Adobe Creative Suite, beautifully branded, a technologist, right? Even though it is in fact a technology, we consider them creatives. My hypothesis is that data scientists are equally creative. We're just using tools that seem to be a little bit technology-like. And as that evolves, what we're going to have is we're going to have data scientists as creative. And that includes you planners, too. It's OK. It's basically creating ways of creating tools to help data-driven decision-making. But first, what we have to do is we have to take data sets, which are historic data sets, and we have to move them forward to make them possible for us to make decisions off of. So again, we have that understand and define, but now we've got this opportunity to train and teach, which can tell me something maybe a little bit more that I can then design around. So of course, if you get a degree in applied mathematics and architecture, you should spend 6 months working at Wieden+Kennedy. Because that makes perfect sense, but that's what I did. And in that 6 months, we figured out a way to work with the incredible planners and strategists. So if anybody's from Wieden+Kennedy here, hi guys. The planners and strategists, and here's some of the things that we discovered by doing training data sets and learning from those. So it turns out that it doesn't matter who the kernel is. All that matters on an advert is the last, how long the end card is on the advert. So it needs to be 6 seconds. And then it can be, so this opens up an incredible creative opportunity, which is instead of having long discussions about who might be the best kernel, we actually can have a conversation about actually who might be the best contextual kernel, because we don't need to link that to performance. Same thing with understanding why people travel. And so this fundamentally changes brands. So in the selfie culture, I want to go someplace so that I can prove that I was there, right? But what if I just have life-size photos that I can selfie? Now, what does that experience look like? And then the last one's a really interesting optimization challenge around data sets, and I'm happy to talk about these afterwards, around sporting company. And what do you do when you don't have pipeline of people playing sports? Well, you have to figure out why they're not playing sports. And it turns out in that particular cultures, if you fall and have a bruise, that becomes a badge that you've failed. So now we have a whole campaign around actually identifying that as a badge of honor, right? Which is to say, I tried, and I'm going to try again. So this is a fundamental shift using data and design as the outlet for what we do with that. So then the next thing is that if we go from a training model to a design model, actually what we're about to emerge on, and everybody knows the companies that are doing this, is a learning and decision-making model, which is to just set an organization up so that it can learn about a specific thing, make a decision, and do it again. So anybody who's had Netflix or, it's all the stuff, right? Netflix, Spotify, et cetera. And what their big thing is that they're constantly releasing and revving on what they're doing. So I think Netflix is issuing an update something like every 7 minutes or 17 minutes, I don't remember which. And so that's the space that we're headed into, right? It's this thing of constantly tweaking for me. But there's a bunch of really interesting and challenging questions that come with that, right? Which is what what does that mean? Because the Netflix feed that I have is different than somebody else, and we have a really big problem, right? I mean, I don't think anybody here is surprised by Facebook and adverts and not knowing where everything is, right? And there's no way to know that, except for there is. It's just setting up a tool that allows us to do that and asking it the question. So if we're in a, sorry, that's kind of like an abrupt thing. So if we're in it's like, so if we're in a learning and decision-making model or cycle, then what does that actually mean for the things that we're going to be doing, like the jobs that we'll have, and what does that mean for trust and transparency around things? And furthermore, and this is the one that really kind of freaks people out, we're talking about like, you successfully have an AI conversation if you don't say robots are going to take over your job, right? And so actually, I genuinely believe it won't, because it turns out that training a computer to identify this as skin cancer is way easier than training a computer to say it's time to fix this, right? And so what that means is that our jobs are always going to exist. It's just that knowledge will be completely accessible, right? And so it'll be democratized. And what's really scary about that for big organizations and brands is that it might potentially, I think it already is, but you having institutional knowledge actually may not matter anymore, because if we're in a constantly learning and data-driven decision-making model, what's that mean to that C-suite group of people sitting up at the board saying, well, we're here because we have the institutional knowledge and all of those things, right? And that's a really scary thing. And so it's leveling the playing field, and people aren't quite sure what that looks like or what they're going to do. And so this thing tells us what the future is going to be looking like, right? And again, slightly truncated version. We have a couple more minutes, and I'd like to open it up for questions if possible, so I'm going to blow through this really quickly. But these are the things that we're about to start seeing. So we're going to go from accessibility to information, right? Like, people's brains have fundamentally changed. You don't remember anything anymore. You just remember where to find the thing that you need. And now we're going to be having things like accessibility to learning, going from a market economy to an intelligence economy, institutional liberalism to epistocratic networks, and so on, institutional religion to virtual reality games. That's a little bit spicy, but absolutely happening. Anybody who has a small child and tried to get them away from things like Pokemon Go, that is a religion to some people. And then evolution through natural selection to intelligent design. And these are the things that are terrifying. And the one thing we know about humans, to be absolutely certain, is that we will absolutely go too far. If there's a red button, we will push it. If there is something that we can, so this is now the big question. And so gone are the days of Rosie from the Jetsons, who is a humanoid AI who's going to do something. Instead, what we have is a whole bunch of AIs that are going to connect to each other, and they're going to have context around that. So the same AI that drives my car should not be the AI that does my shopping. That should not be the AI that tells me what food I should have. And so as we're trying to struggle with what that means and how we get AIs to talk to each other, that's the sort of the big question. So these are my big questions, and this is purely my point of view as a data scientist, which is, I believe that data science is to the digital world as industrial design is to the physical world, right? So like, who is the Dieter Rams of data science, and what principles do we need for design, and what does that mean for wider experiences? I have all of these questions, but I can open them up to more questions. So I think we've got like 2 minutes left. Anybody have any questions? Silence. Okay, that's always fun. Here's another question that I have. How are we going to craft change that changes pixels? How are we going to craft change now that pushing pixels matters less and less, right? Because it's experiences. How are we going to assess an organization's readiness to adopt, right? So we get asked a lot, hey, can you help us optimize or we want to have a transformation, which is 100% true, but very often what we're doing is optimizing, not transforming, because to transform, you have to be willing to fundamentally change your organization. Otherwise, you're just optimizing within the existing paradigm that you already have, which is completely valid and lucrative. The others that we have is how can we use our positions as creatives to keep people aware, engaged, at ease? These are all questions that I'm dealing with every day on our teams. What's it mean when we're doing a progressive profiling website where one person who's managing their wealth a different way than another person sees differences in their performance? That's a science question, which is that variable because of us, or is that variable because of something else, right? So these are all really big questions that we're dealing with, and all of them have design implications. And the question is how are we equipping our designers to handle that? Seriously, no questions? Oh, there's a question. Okay, thank you.
If you go back a couple slides, you're going to from or from to to.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the phrase unpack, but from institutional liberalism to epistocratic networks. Can you unpack that for us?
Can I unpack that for you? I knew somebody's going to ask about that. So if we think about how history is, how humans have evolved historically, it's one, and then we had a tribe of people, and then we had cities of people, and we have institutions that sort of shape the type of person I want to identify with. I pick this brand and not that brand. And an epistocratic network is, I think from an advertising standpoint, the equivalent would be a demographic versus a psychographic. So an epistocratic network is not necessarily somebody that I can physically interface with, and not necessarily something that's been formally set together, but rather an informal, formal network of people.
Would that be more blockchain technology to an extent?
Ooh. So it could be blockchain technology. For those who don't, does everybody know what blockchain technology is? It's basically a consortium. It's the thing that's driving cryptocurrencies, amongst many other things. But basically, it's an agreed group of people who have a shared interest that agree around a certain governance, which is to say, this collection of banks are going to decide that we will do our double balance booking. If you said that this person had money, I will accept that as a thing. And it gets locked into a blockchain through a series of technologies around basically a unique number that can't be replicated. So yes, in a digital environment, that's absolutely true. An epistocratic network in a physical or in a virtual environment of human to human would be a social network to a virtual reality. So anybody who's in Halo, you may never have met the friends that you consider very, very close friends. So that is changing the definition of what we mean by networks and communities of people. Did that answer your question? Excellent. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have marketers who have come to you to counsel. Have you counseled them on transformation, but what they're really doing is optimizing? Do you ever say no, or is there sort of, for all of us to be thinking about, almost like a prerequisite that has to happen so that they're understanding the accountability of what they're about to get into in terms of privacy and ethics and morals and responsibility, all the way through from creatives who truly understand emotions better and better and better to the technologist who can act upon it?
So yes, we have said no. There are, because it's a little bit Wild West, right? So in the EU right now, so here's a really great example. So in the EU, if a result, so a return, comes, that is a recommendation that has come from a machine learning model, the trick here is that from a machine learning model, we don't actually know why it's saying that, right? In the EU, you are now legally allowed to ask for a defense of that. And so now we have a whole bunch of companies going, shit, what do we do? It's a completely legitimate question, and as a human, you can defend your point of view. So these are the types of things where we have like a mental checklist, but as organizations are in different places, so if we're gonna share the dirty secret of what all of this is that what we have is people bought into enterprise networks in the 90s, and they wrote them down over 20 years, and now they're 10 years past their useful life, and now everybody's like, well, what do we do in microservices and and so we're trying to build machine learning models and AI off of legacy data sets that perhaps have bias based on how they were collected and whatever else. So when we look at an organization, we look at an organization's ability to change, but more importantly, what they want to do. So is it to transform, i.e. Elevate revenue, or is it to transform, I want to reach more people? Is it, so there's, again, that spectrum of what you're actually looking for, and there are absolutely organizations that are just simply not prepared to be transformational, and that's a tough conversation to have. Yep. Yep. No more time. Okay.